Everybody, welcome back to the big results video. So a couple days ago, 3-4 days ago, maybe, I'm not sure exactly when it was, I put a video out which was in my series, Just How Good Is the Line 6 Helix. I was comparing a particular amp model from the Line 6 Helix and the Fractal FM3, which I acquired very recently. And I had a ton of requests to do comparison videos. I'm gonna do a few more. And I did a blind test because I think that I'm going to say a little bit more about this very soon. I think that's one of the only ways to really get people's honest, natural reactions without something called confirmation bias, which I will also talk about in a moment. So today I want to give you the results of that test. I had a lot of wonderful comments, some really dumb comments, as would be expected, as pretty much every video gets that. But I want to show you what I did, how I compared them, and also add another little thing into the ring, which is the Helix stock cab. So first and foremost, before I get to the results, so what I had is a lot of different comments. Most people just kind of followed along with what I mentioned I was hoping people would do in the previous video, which was, tell me whether tone A was the Helix or the Fractal, or tone B was the Helix or the Fractal. I'll express the answers into who thought which one was the Helix when I do it, which is by deductive reasoning tells you that the other one they thought was the opposite, or so I would think. I also asked folks to put down which one they preferred, which always throws another wrench into the ring, because folks go, well, if I think this is the Helix and I want that to be better, which one should I say? So it makes it a little more interesting. As I said though, folks, this is all just in good fun. I had so many comments where I had the typical ones where said, this is a stupid test, this doesn't mean anything. And you know, I never understand those people simply because just don't watch it and move on. Let other people do it if they enjoy it, right? I don't understand that. But anyways, I'm not forcing anybody to watch it. I had somebody tell me that I can't be trusted because I'm Team Helix, whatever that means. One thing I am and will always do in these things is be 100% on the up and up on what I did and how I did it, regardless of what the outcome was. I had some folks tell me how boring this is and there's too many of these videos, but you know, lots of people watch them and lots of people like them, and lots of people tell me they enjoy them, so that's why I do them. So anyways, aside from those ridiculous comments, which I just ignore, I get a little chuckle out of them and then I ignore, I then move on to some of the other things, you know, and I got the typical ones where, you know, so many folks were, this sounds more digital, that sounds more digital. Not really sure what that means. This had more high end, that had more high end, this had more low end. And it was really funny, and even a couple of folks commented on this, is that some folks were saying, you know, oh, tone A is much more, you know, high end and brighter. And then others are like, oh, tone A is so much darker and tone B is so much brighter. And a lot of the comments contradicted one another. So you say, well, what does that mean? Somebody came on, I believe, and I'm paraphrasing, and said, well, that just shows that this means nothing. Nobody even knows what they're listening to. And I don't agree with that. I think what it actually shows is A, everybody hears things a little different. B, everybody has very different preferences. I had some people say how they didn't like either of these tones, and that's fine. I don't know if that's like maybe a little dig at me or not. I don't know. I laugh at all of it anyways, but you know, I wasn't dialing in a tone that I was going to use in the studio here. This was literally an amp block with minimal adjustments on either unit, just to get them somewhere in the ballpark, which is almost impossible unless we knew how to line up the settings in a way that corresponded to one another, and the same IR. So, you know, obviously if I was going to use either of these in the studio, I would do much more tweaking to them, whether it be on amp controls or outboard EQs or outboard EQ blocks, compression, whatever. So again, this wasn't presented as, these are such incredible tones. These were just, as I mentioned in the first video. Now, somebody else told me I was cheating because I used impulse responses instead of the stock cabs in the Helix, saying that, you know, the old myth on the internet that's been going around and around, that stock cabs on Helix are the worst thing ever and you can't use them. And I've done lots of videos that prove that false. Now, whether it's somebody's preference or not is another thing, and I'm fine if somebody prefers something else. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, to just discount it as they're useless or no good is, I don't know, a little bit silly to me, but whatever. I'm going to show you a little bit with the Helix stock cabs today as well. So I already explained in the video, I think some people don't watch videos or listen to the explanation of them, but still want to make a comment. I find that really odd. I would think that if you're going to come out with such a strong opinion and make a comment that you would at least listen to my explanation as to how or why I did things, which I always try to explain. So I explained that I was trying to isolate the modeling, and if we were to then throw stock cabs versus impulse response, or Helix factory cabs versus Fractal factory cabs, that we're adding too many variables and you're not really listening to any one thing anymore for comparison purposes. So that's why I did the impulse responses. But hopefully with the stock cabs example I'm going to show you today, you'll see that, you know, I could have thrown that in too, but obviously when you start dealing with different speakers and impulse responses, there's going to be such a huge difference, and not necessarily that one's going to be better or worse. Just again, it comes down to personal preference. All right, so having said that, let's get to the results. So, drum roll please. So, the line 6 Helix was tone A. All right, now what's interesting about it is let's look at how people answered. So, of the votes for which one was Helix, 42 votes said that Helix is A, and 39 votes said that Helix is B. So what that amounts to is 51.9% voted that Helix is A and were correct, and 48.1% voted Helix is B and were incorrect. And that's nothing to be ashamed of, because it's almost an impossible test. So really we see that it's basically a 50-50 split, which means most folks are just guessing, as they would be in a blind test, right? Now when we get to which one each person preferred, this gets quite interesting. 35 votes preferred A, which was the Helix, and 28 votes preferred B, which was the Fractal. So 55.5% preferred A, 45.5% preferred B. Very close again, almost a 50-50 split with a slight leaning towards preference being A. Now what's funny about that is you could probably play those same files to the same people on a different day, mixing them up, and they might give you a different answer. That's the funny thing, right? And these things are so close and both so usable, right? The other one I found kind of interesting is that 26 people voted that they couldn't really tell the difference, or they didn't figure any difference there was meaningful enough for it to matter, which was another very interesting result. Now, a lot of folks say, yeah, but that doesn't tell you about the feel of the amp, and that doesn't blah, blah, you know, because they don't want to ever think that maybe their amp modeler of choice might be equal to another. They always want it to be better. So there's this thing called confirmation bias that we all have, myself included. Every one of us as human beings has this. Now, why a blind test is so super important is simply because as soon as we know what we're listening to, our pre-existing opinions and bias is going to determine what our vote will be for, or what our opinion at that moment will be. It's not based on what we're hearing anymore, it's based off of what we're seeing and what other piece of information we know. Why would people be guilty of utilizing this confirmation bias? Well, it could be a number of things. It could be brand loyalty. I love line 6, I hate Fractal. I love Fractal, I hate line 6, which I think both are ridiculous. Both are amazing companies who make amazing products. And I love them both. They're really, really incredible. And hats off to the teams at both companies for making our lives as guitar players so incredible. So brand loyalty could be one thing. The other thing is if you just spent $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 on a piece of equipment, you're darn right you're going to want that to be better, right? So we're all susceptible to this, myself included. And you know, running a studio for many years, I had some very high-end equipment. And if you'd ever asked me whether, say, more budget equipment could have ever matched this, I would have said, no way, until I started doing a very important thing and doing valid blind tests to really listen to the differences between different pieces of equipment. And I was blown away. Two things. We have to eliminate the variables. So many folks have a strong opinion about Fractal is better, line 6 is better. I don't even know what that means, because in the end it comes down to what folks' personal needs are and ideals, and if one suits them better, then that's what's better for them. So I will never say one is better than the other. But what's interesting is a lot of folks will say something like, Fractal blows line 6 out of the water. And then you ask them the question that, well, have you ever compared them side by side in a volume matched blind test, say with the same performance going through them? Or have you ever been playing your guitar in a room with the monitoring system and had somebody else switching back and forth between the two modelers, volume matched? Well, I'm going to guess the answer in most cases is no, because most folks don't bother to do that and they don't even have the means to do it. But yet they have strong opinions about which one is better, more realistic, has more depth, blows this one out of the water. And it's really an interesting thing because none of them have the so-called authority to make such an opinion because they've never done the proper comparison. And I'm not saying that this test here is the be-all and end-all or anything other than what it was, which is what I explained it was in the first video, but it was done properly in the sense that it was volume matched with the same performance. So you are eliminating variables. So anybody who is trying to figure out the differences between two things, and I've talked about this in so many videos, and a friend of mine, Igor Starlovsky from Line 6, he's one of the development team at Line 6, great guy, did an amazing video the other day on his YouTube channel. I'll try to remember to link to it below. And he talked about this volume matching and how deceptive our ears can be to us when presented with differing pieces of information. So go watch that video. It's excellent. It's something I've been talking about for years in my videos. If you're going to compare two sounds to decide which one you like better, which one you think is better, you have to have them volume matched. And it has to be of the same exact performance. I've had so many situations where I've played something through one sound, played the same lick through another sound, and then realized that just the way I attacked the strings, where I positioned my pick, in the case of a guitar part, right? How loud or soft I hit, all had huge bearing on the final tone, and that was having a bigger effect on the tone than actually the difference between the two things I was trying to compare, if that makes sense. So, you know, I hate to harp on it, but these things are just factual, and so many folks, I think this is how a lot of these kind of ridiculous rumors get spread on the net about A being better than B or B being better than A when there was no true proper comparison done. Now, that's not to say that once that comparison is done that you're not going to still have the same opinion, and that's perfectly fine. I'll never tell anybody their opinion is invalid, but please do the test right in the first place. So just a few things I wanted to talk about. Sorry for going on long-winded. Now, let's do this. Let's go over and take a look at the settings that I used on these. So for the Helix, what I have up here is I have this IR from the fine folks at Ownhammer, which is the OH412 MRBW M75-GNR balanced. Okay. So that's their balanced tone. I just picked one that I thought, this one sounds kind of nice. What I did is I put a low cut at 90 hertz and a high cut at 12 kilohertz. Nothing too dramatic, but I did the same on both. Now, the one thing is, the low and high cut dB per octave slopes, I'm not sure what they are on the Helix, whereas you can set that on the FM3. But I set them both to the same frequencies just to try to keep things as equal as possible, okay? And the settings I used on the Placator Dirty were drive at 5, bass at 5, mid at 5, sorry, treble at 6, presence at 7, my channel volume, which is irrelevant, just other than getting the volume where I wanted it to be. It's not going to change the tone. Master at 4, HBE off, fat on, C45 off, saturation off, ripple bias, bias X all set at 5. That was it for the Helix. We're going to come back to this in just a second. On the FM3, what I used was, as you can see, the same IR right here. This first cab up here is muted. I set the low cut at 90 hertz, high cut at 12,000 hertz with a slope of 12 dB per octave, which I believe is what comes up as stock. Didn't touch anything else. Didn't do anything with the preamp. Didn't put any of the room air parameters in. And I left everything in the Align tab the same as well. Now over to the amp. I pulled up the Friedman BE, input drive at 4, bass at 5, mid at 5, treble at 5, presence at 4, depth at 1.5, master volume at 4. That's what I did there. And what you see here is Cubase 11 Pro. What I started off with here was my guitar DI, which you see right here, which was basically this. Okay, no need to keep going through that. We get it. awful bland direct tone. That was recorded through an IK Multimedia AX-IO, just as basically my interface and direct box. A very nice audio interface that does the job really well. And the settings on that were just the pure setting, and I'm just trying to look at it here on the sharp. So basically the default kind of unprocessed settings of the instrument input. So I can get rid of that, mute that out. Now what I did do here is I have Helix stock cabs, Helix IR, and Fractal IR. So you might be wondering where I'm going with this Helix stock cabs. Well, what I did after the fact is I thought for this video it might be fun. I'm going to take about 1 minute, throw a similar Marshall style cab up in the Helix. I paired up 2 cabs, put one on, I believe it was a R121 ribbon mic and one with a 57, and just balanced those, and then came up with this, nothing else. Just so I could show that, now, it's going to be different than these, whether you prefer it or not is up to you. And again, if I did a blind test and asked, which do you prefer, I really wonder if we wouldn't just get this sort of close to 50-50 split because, you know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, as they say, right? But I also do have the same 2 files that I used for Helix and Fractal with the impulse response, or the IR, in the previous video. So here was the Helix IR. Now you can hear them sort of allowing your confirmation bias to take over, which, as we know, invalidates any of our opinions now, because the confirmation bias will come in and want us to, you know, make us want to like one or the other, myself included. So here we go. Here's the Helix impulse response. Or I should say the Helix with the impulse response. Here is now the Fractal with the impulse response. Okay, so in the end, I kind of just say, yeah, they both sound fine. Would I, if using one of those in the mix, would I tweak them a bit? Yeah, absolutely. I would likely EQ them. Yeah, no problem. Would I want a different tone? Well, it depends on the situation. I don't know, right? So, but I don't think one is better. I think they're different. Both are very good. Having played through them both through my Studio Mars and Power Cab, they both feel amazing to play through. They both feel great. I know some folks don't want to hear me say that simply because they want me to say one feels better. Both of these companies have done outstanding jobs at modeling these amps. Different a little bit? Sure. Which one is more like the real thing? Well, I'm going to have a video on that coming up soon because that's an interesting topic. But yeah, I like them both. Now, let's do this. Let's go back to the Helix with the Ownhammer impulse response. And actually, let's listen now to what it sounds like with this little mix on the Helix stock cabs. And I'll just show you what I did here in, I believe it was this preset. So I had this amp with the same settings, nothing's changed. I took a 412 Greenback 25 cab with a 57 dynamic at 1 inch, put the same low cut and high cut filters on. Then I went to another of the same 412 Greenback 25 cab with a 121 ribbon at 1 inch, same low and high cut settings. And then I just balanced it a little more over to the Path B or the ribbon mic. So just blending a little bit of the SM57 in. Now, what did that sound like? Well, that sounded like this. All right, what'd you think? Something interesting here. There's a reason I wanted to talk a little bit in between letting you hear the previous Helix impulse response version, Fractal impulse response version, and the Helix stock cabs. Anybody ever heard of something called echoic memory? Well, that is what they call our ability to remember a tone like this, right? Something with a certain timbre or certain other information that our brain decodes. Our echoic memory is very, very short, like to the tune of 1 to 2 seconds before it fades away. Now, I'm no expert on this. I've researched it a little bit. But that means that if we hear a sound, a tone, let's say a guitar tone, wait 20 seconds and listen to another tone, we really have no ability to recall enough about that previous tone to know whether this is the same, different, close to the same, dramatically different, you know, whatever you want to call it, or even which one we prefer. This is why so many folks will flip back and forth between things and then go, I don't know which one I like better, oh my goodness, you know. And if there's any interruption in between, we have a very hard time. So imagine adding to that different volume levels, different actual performances, and you can see why it's almost impossible to ever compare two things and come away with any sort of definitive answer, right? It's a pretty interesting thing. So now let's do this. Let's go back and forth between the Helix stock cabs and the Helix with the impulse response. Let's do this. And again, these are all volume matched to the best of my ability within Cubase 11. Now let's compare the Helix stock cab to the Fractal with the impulse response. This is going to sound very different. It has no choice but to. But again, there's going to be a personal preference here, and it would be wonderful to do a blind test where it's just like, don't try to guess which is which. Just tell me which one you like better. I won't even tell you what you're listening to, right? So let's take a listen to this. Okay, quite different. Honestly, I believe that anybody, now there's going to be people who are going to prefer one to the other. That's fine. Whether that's based off of confirmation bias or just their actual preference is debatable, I guess. But in the end, who cares? If you like one better than the other, use that one. If you think it's going to get you to your sort of end game quicker, then please use that, right? But my opinion on this, and take it for what it's worth, this is not, you know, pledging allegiance to any one particular side, as so many folks like to call it, whatever that means, is that I think these are all decent, they're all usable. If I was handed any one of those tones, whether it's stock cabs, IRs, Fractal, Helix, I would just get on with using them and it would be perfectly fine. You know, I could do a little tweak here and there on the EQ, who knows, right? But really and honestly, I'd be fine with all of them. And I think this whole debate about what's better, what's worse, just comes down to what our preference is, you know? So I always find it funny when I hear these, this blows this out of the water, that blows that out of the water. We live in a great time, right? To be a guitar player, as I've said before, this is really wonderful stuff, to be able to access all of these different tones. What I really like about the FM3 is that there's some amp models in there, such as the Morgan AC20. What a beautiful amp model. Is it because Fractal did such an amazing job of modeling it? Well, yeah, of course, but it's also because that original amp is so incredible too. I would love to have that in the Helix as well. You know, so there's going to be amp models in one that aren't in the other. There's going to be features in one that aren't in the other that may, you know, make one person gravitate towards one or the other. There could be the ease of use factor. There could be a million factors. And I believe that those factors should play a bigger role now in deciding what modeler we decide to go with, more so than even the sound, because I think the sound is really there on all of them. Maybe slightly different, but still there. As we learned from which one do you prefer, and we see that it's basically split up the middle, and that really shows us that there's really no accounting for taste, and nobody can be told they're right or wrong because of their taste. So that's my take on it. Now, one other thing that I wanted to look at with this is, it's kind of interesting because what I can do is somebody could say, well, what about if we wanted to, let's say, you know, match the Helix to the Fractal or vice versa? Well, there's this really neat piece of software that comes with one of the Ozone packages I have, which is a great piece of mastering software from the fine folks over at Isotope. I love their plugins, amazing stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this plugin to capture the sound of the Fractal playback, and I'll just hit capture here. Okay, and I'll stop it there. Now it's captured that. Now over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this over to my Helix track. And I'll open this up, and I'm going to capture the sound of the Helix version with the IR now. Okay, now what it's done here is it's applied an EQ curve to the Helix version to match it to what it heard from the Fractal version. It allows me to use some smoothing, which will either, you'll see it'll kind of zoom in on the resolution of the frequencies it's using. It sort of sets it to default around 50, and then it only adds about 10% amount in, which you can really change. So if we go all the way up to 100%, we see it's cutting some bottom end. There was a little more bottom end in the Helix. Little changes here through the mids and the upper mids, and then it's adding some real sizzle up in the super high end. But let's do this. Let's start off at 10%-ish where it starts, and we'll listen back to the Helix with this EQ applied, and I'll add more of the EQ as What do you guys think? Almost indistinguishable now after we match the EQs with the match EQ. So even any of the differences are so subtle that we could actually just EQ them, and we see through the mid-range it wasn't too terribly far off. You know, if we put the smoothing on here, well, that's way too much smoothing. You know, if we went to the 50%, you know, there are subtle changes way big up here in the more bottom on the Helix. And that could have just been stuff I adjusted. Like I said before, when I did the first thing, I did it very quick. I just kind of threw them together, got things going. I could have used a tool like this to sort of notice where I could tweak it even more. And with some time invested in it, would probably go a long way to making it even harder to differentiate between the two. So for whatever any of that was worth, I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a fun experiment. I had some requests to do some comparisons with more clean edge of breakup tones, which I'm going to do. Maybe I'll take a little bit of a different approach. Maybe I'll try something new. I'd also like to maybe compare some of the reverbs and delays and effects as well. I did that recently with the Helix and some Strymon pedals. And a lot of people were shocked. They said, you know, the Helix does not have good reverbs or delays. The Helix does not match up to this. And then when it came down to it again, they were like, oh, it's actually not so bad, right? So again, if the test is done properly, volume matched, getting things as close as we can with the same performance, a lot of time the differences that we feel are there aren't as big as we thought they were. And if we remove the idea of confirmation bias by doing blind tests, oftentimes they disappear. So an interesting topic that I like to discuss, and I'm going to have another video, like I said, coming up discussing this type of stuff a little more in depth, nothing to do with any particular model, it's just the whole state of modeling in general. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your time. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you didn't, you don't have to watch. It's that simple. You don't have to leave me a comment telling me how much you didn't like it. It's fine, because I probably just will chuckle and not respond. But I hope you guys did enjoy it. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would enjoy it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the little bell notification to get notified when we put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more content, guys. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Ciao for now.